and you prayed, you did your salah, you're honest, you're good to people, you did the good actions that you knew you're supposed to be doing, and then you're still in the red, you're still liable for punishment with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or this was wasted, or you find out that's not accepted. So he says, let me highlight some of those pitfalls for you, so that's not your situation. So he says, be careful of the things that ruin your actions, that nullify your deeds, because in that case, all your hard work goes down the drain. You don't achieve the reward of those who do actions that we've been talking about so far. You don't get to rest with those who put in the work. They get to rest in the hereafter after all the hard work here. And you miss out on the good and the reward of this world and hereafter. You're going to miss out on both. You'll be the biggest loser. How does that happen? He says through some of these actions. It's just some examples, right? This is not all of them. So the first one he begins with is ar-riya. What is ar-riya? Showing off, right? To do things with the expectation or the goal of people praising you. So he says the first of these things that ruin your actions is showing off. It is narrated in the hadith Qudsi. What is hadith Qudsi? When I say a hadith is hadith Qudsi, what does that mean about it? So it's the words of Allah that the Prophet ﷺ told us. How's it different than the Quran then? Because the Quran is the word of Allah that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ taught us. So what's the difference? You're right, but what is the difference? Wahy. But they're both wahy. Right? So now we're getting into... Hold up. You know else want to take a stab at it? If these are the words of Allah, it shows the Quran. The Hadith Qudsi, the Prophet I'm saying Allah said. Quran is the same thing. So why does it have its own category? Yeah, Yusuf? It's tied to a specific wording. Okay, so that's one difference that scholars have said, that the Hadith Qudsi, when the Prophet ﷺ is telling us Allah said this, it could have been to a previous prophet, could have been the previous nation, so that means it could have been a different language. It could have been not the exact wording, it could have been just the meaning, that he's just relaying to us the meaning, while the wording could have been something else. So these are possibilities, but they're not the main difference. The main difference is that we were told that the Quran is the direct wording of Allah through which we can worship Him with. So we can recite it in Salah. Reciting it is an act of worship. Reciting the Hadith Qudsi is not an act of worship. Or you can't say, Ya ibadi inni haramtu dhulma ala nafsi, and you're reciting it as a recitation, as a ritual. But the Quran is a ritual, meaning just sitting there and reciting Quran is a ritual in and of itself that earns you reward, while Hadith Qudsi is not the case. Then what you said also is that the Hadith Qudsi, we were not given such strict restrictions regarding its wording, while the Quran we were. Right? We were told not to change anything from the Quran, while the Hadith Qudsi is the general meaning. You'll find different narrations that highlight different things, and so on and so forth. So they're both from Allah. Hadith Qudsi is when the Prophet ﷺ is telling us, Allah said this. This is something that Allah said. Like I said, it could have been to the previous nations. It could have been in some other, circumstance, another language. But he's telling us Allah said the following. So he says, he begins this section about showing off riyat, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Hadith Qudsi. So the Prophet is telling us Allah said, and it's part of a longer hadith. He just keeps the last portion of it, which is, مَنْ عَمِلَ عَمَلًا أَشْرَكَ فِيهِ غَيْرِي فَهُوَ لِلَّذِي أَشْرَكَ وَأَنَا مِنْهُ بَرِيءٌ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, whoever does an action and associates in that action someone else, then it is going to belong to that person, that entity. Meaning they can seek out reward there. They can ask that entity if it's accepted or not, because I have nothing to do with it. أَنَا مِنْهُ بَرِيءٌ. I am completely absolving myself from it. Allah is saying that. I don't need your actions. Right? Can you imagine, for example, that you were hired to build a swimming pool by Jeff Bezos? Right? Is he the richest in the world now? So Elon Musk took him over again. What's the latest update? Who cares, right? Whoever that person is in that number one spot right now, he hires you to build a swimming pool. Gives you the specifications, and it's in his house, for example, his house number 40, in some random state that he never really visits. He doesn't really care. It's one of his 50 vacation homes. No one goes there. It's just an extra, build a swimming pool here. Right? As a contractor, you wouldn't really care, right? You're getting paid either way. You're not going to say, well, who's going to swim here? Or does anyone visit this home? None of that really matters to you. You're getting paid for the job. He comes and he finds that instead of the swimming pool, you build a basketball court. And he said, no, according to latest research, basketball is much more healthier than swimming, and I saved you a bunch of money, and I saved you a bunch of space. And you go off all the reasons why you think it was a better idea to build a basketball court. How's that going to end? He's going to be like, oh, well, thank you. That's really, really insightful of you, and I really appreciate you going up and beyond. Is that going to happen? He's going to say, not only are you fired, but he's going to sue you for ruining his property, for even if he doesn't use it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is even a greater example, because in the end of the day, if all of his workers stood up and say no, or not even all of them, 10% of them, Jeff Bezos would suffer, right? He'd have to figure something out. He'd have to please them. So with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the example is even greater, because if 100% of us, since the beginning of time, mankind and jinn stood up and said, not interested, he would not change in the least. He would not decrease in anything. And if all of us, mankind and jinn, from the first to the last, all stood up and in one voice said, we believe and we are the most sincere and we will give it our all, Allah would not gain anything. So the example is so much greater with Allah. But this example, what was the purpose of it? Is that when someone is in absolutely no need, and you're the one who's benefiting, why would he take less than 100%? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in no position, is of no beneficial position. There's no growth when it comes to our piety or our righteousness or our good deeds, our obedience. There's only one benefactor in that, and that's us. So if even 1% of it is for others, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I'm not interested. Right? He's the one who taught us. He's the one who guides us. He's the one who protects us. All of the factors that lead to us doing good, Allah gets the credit. He's deserving of the credit in the first place. So when it comes down to the intention now, if even a small portion of it is for others, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not interested. He says, keep it. And he says, on top of that, on top of the fact of the matter being that Allah will not accept this action, is the person who shows off gets nothing. Not even what he's or she is intending, which is what? What is the showing off person intending by praying, by reading Quran? What are they intending just by virtue of the name being showing off? Praise of others, right? They want others to say, mashallah, look at this person, so pious, so honest, so good, whatever. They want their parents not to, to give them whatever they're holding back because they're not praying. Their intention is something else. So he's saying that the person who does that, who shows off, does not even get what they intended. And he mentions a story here of one of the righteous who says about himself, his name is Hisham ibn Yahya al-Ghassani. He's the one who narrates the story. So it's one of the scholars of the past, he's reciting this story. He says there was a man who says about himself, he's the one who's telling us this story, that I used to be someone who shows off. Kuntum mura'iyan. I used to be someone who shows off. I'm praying, I'm joining the masjid, I'm coming to the Jama'ah so people can give me attention, right? So they can praise me. So he says, I used to be the first person in the masjid always and the last to leave. My norm is I'm the first person there, calling the adhan. I'm the last person to leave, cleaning up, checking for the little pieces of paper. But he's doing all that so people can see and they look. They say, whoa, this guy's always here. No one comes earlier than him. And he's the last to leave. He's saying about himself, I was doing it for that reason. So he says, I did this for 2 whole years. And not a single person did I pass by except they said, look at this show off. It didn't even work. People didn't even say, whoa, this guy is so pious. He's taking care of the masjid. He's always early. He's always late. They just said, this guy's just showing off. What a loser. So he said, for 2 years, the only thing that I heard of people, whenever I made a rak'ah or I did any type of good in the masjid, people just said, look at this guy trying to show off. So it didn't work. They didn't even say, look how pious he is. They saw him. They saw right through him. So he says, one night I stood in prayer now and I said, and I came to this realization that I'm wasting my time and I'm just showing off with my actions. So I announced to Allah, oh Allah, you are my witness that I am no longer going to do this. So he's coming to this realization in the middle of the night as he's praying in private, and he's saying, oh Allah, I don't want to do this anymore. I realize that it's wrong and I'm not okay with it. So he says, I then went to the masjid at night and I passed by 2 men. And then one of them asked the other, isn't this the show off? Like this is the guy who's always trying to show how pious he is. And then the other one responded to him, no, he no longer does that. So what made them change? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's a hidden connection. If you make a resolve to do something for the sake of Allah, He's not absent. And He holds all the keys, right? He controls all the factors. He holds all the doors. When you resolve inside of you to please Allah, to do something special, to stop doing something that you know is evil, you can expect the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to come swiftly, to be visible, to be physical, to be in front of you. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not someone, or not, the deen of Allah and the promise of Allah is not something we recommend to try it out. But with that being said, I will say try it. Make a firm resolve to please Allah or to abandon something that's haram and watch the benefits come to your life. So we don't. What I was saying earlier is that we don't test Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're not saying, well, if this works, then I'll be a good person. That's not our attitude as Muslims, right? Because we recognize that the only one who's gaining is me and you, right? It's not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that attitude has no place in Islam. But with that being said, make the resolve and watch the positive results in your life. So he's saying, like, the point is, the person who's showing off doesn't even get what they're looking for, which is the praise of the people. Because that is so volatile, that is so inconsistent, that is lost so easily. So it's not worth the effort. And in fact, it was also narrated in some, just like a random narration, a Bedouin was asked by a man, should I tell you about all the secrets of pleasing the people? And he said, no. That's it. He's like, not interested. I know it's not real. It's not reachable. He said, I'm fine. I'm good. Keep these secrets or these 10 successful tips, or you won't believe what happens, or, publicists hate him, how to gain everyone's favor, all these that had no effect on him because he said it's not real. I'm going to chase the praise of the people that is unreachable in real life. The Prophet ﷺ said, now this isn't in the book, but like I was saying in the previous weeks, we want to look at the source material, the hadith and the ayat, to get a better understanding of our own Prophet ﷺ, the direct words of our Prophet said about these topics. Even though a lot of times Ibn Qudamah does that, he wanted to keep it brief as a reminder. And not to go off on a tangent each topic, because that would make each topic its own individual lecture as opposed to sticking to what he wrote. But one hadith or ayah to get a better look at those topics is what our aim was. For this topic of showing off, it's a lengthy hadith, the hadith in Bukhari and Muslim about the first three who will ignite the hellfire. أول من تصعر بهم النار يوم القيامة. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us and our families. He said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, these three people are the first to kindle the fire of the hellfire, meaning it's turned on using these three individuals, the first to be punished. They're not disbelievers. They're not people who waged war against the Muslims. They are three people who appear to be righteous. So it's a lengthy hadith, but he says, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the first of them is a shaheed, someone who died on the battlefield. Right? Our tradition, Islam shows us that's the highest level of sacrifice. Not just our tradition, every single concept, right? That's why we have Veterans Day, that's why we have Memorial Day. That's why we have all these different holidays focused on honoring the people who sacrificed their lives for this concept or this nation or this holiday, whatever it may be. So likewise in Islam, the highest status is someone who, how much does this mean to you? My entire life, right? So that person puts their life on the line, protecting this concept or implementing it. So that's the first person to ignite the hellfire, someone who died. So he's going to be told, what did you do? What was your life? And he'll say, I'll take one. I fought in the sake of Allah. I fought in the path of Allah. Thank you, sir. I fought for the path of Allah. This is a good idea. Until I get thirsty, then I'll think of plan B. So I fought in the path of Allah until I lost my life doing so. I gave my life for this religion. And then he'll be told, you are a liar. That's not true. You fought and you died, so it could be said, you are brave. This is a warrior. This is what our nation is all about. This is whatever. You fought for this reason. And he will be told, فَقَدْ قِيلَ, and it was said. You got that already. You're done. Your reward has been paid already. The prestige, the legacy, the statues they built in your honor, the streets that they named after you, the children that were named after your legacy, that's why you did it and you had it. So here you get nothing. So he's going to be thrown into the hellfire. He is not just thrown into the hellfire. The Prophet says, ثُمَّ أُمِرَ بِهِ فَيُسْحَبُ عَلَى وَجْهِهِ حَتَّى أُلْقِيَ فِي النَّارِ. Very, very strong wording, very, very harsh imagery. He is going to be, now it's going to be commanded, and he will be dragged on his face until he's thrown to the hellfire. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect all of us. The second person is a scholar, and in one narration, a reciter of the Quran. What did you do? What were you given? I was given this gift and I used it so people can hear your words, can understand your religion. He will be told you're a liar. You did it so you can get the prestige, you can get the fame, you can get the limelight, you can get the likes, you can get the follows. You had all of that. You've been paid in full. So today you have nothing and the same commands are given, and he is dragged on his face and he's thrown to the hellfire. And the last person is someone who gave in charity. What were you given? What was your life about? I was given wealth, and so I spent for the sake of Allah. I found the needy. I fed the hungry. That's what my life was about. He'll be told, you are a liar. you did it so it can be said so and so is charitable, is philanthropic, and you had all that. And so today you have nothing. So the same sequence of events for these three people, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. So this shows us the importance of sincerity, right? The sincere are, the insincere, their actions are not only not eligible for reward, but they're eligible for punishment, right? Why are they eligible for punishment? Remember the Jeff Bezos example. Not only did they not do what they were commanded, but they used the resources in a way that's unpleasing or displeasing to the Creator, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to the Master. So even greater is the sin and the shame when it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, greater than anybody in this dunya, right? The Jeff Bezos example, there's some give take, right? At the end of the day, like we said, he needs employees, he needs customers, while Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala needs nothing. So that was the first action, the first concept that ruins your deeds, which is what? Riya, translated into showing off. The second thing he mentions is al-ujb. Al-ujb or ujub. Al-ujb is ijab al-mar'i bi nafsih, for a person to be deluded regarding themselves. And this is especially important in our times where flexing is a thing, right? And flexing was always a thing, but especially nowadays, your ability to do it in front of large amounts of people gain the attention of an insane amount of people that was never possible before. Before, you'd flex in front of who, right? Your gathering, your marketplace, your village, your city, if you're, of the few people who lived in actual cities. And then it still wouldn't reach a couple of hundred people max, right? But nowadays, you can post it online and reach thousands, tens of thousands, millions. So it's a lot more dangerous. It's a lot more important to realize. Ujb has two manifestations, and it's translated as self-delusion, self-amazement. It is when you are impressed with yourself. This has a religious manifestation and has a regular worldly one. The religious one is you're impressed by your good deeds. I'm so pious. Mashallah about me. You say mashallah to yourself, right? You look in the mirror and say mashallah. So you are so impressed by your piety or your lack of sin, for example, or that you see someone doing this and you think your first thought, or your dominant thought rather, is that's not me. I'm better than this person. They're indulging. They're sinful. How they dress, how they look. This is something that is a huge pitfall. And that leads to the nullification of your deeds, right? That leads to your deeds meaning nothing. So ujb is when you are impressed with yourself, and that leads to the nullification of your deeds. He says here, it was narrated about the person who's like this, لا يجاوز عمله رأسه. His actions don't pass his head. Meaning, he does an action or she does an action, and it's so great, and it's mashallah, it's done so well, and the voice was so nice, and it was so organized. All that description is where? He says it doesn't pass here. Because in reality, that's not what the action was. It wasn't sincere, it wasn't done properly. It's just that person deluded themselves into thinking as such. And he says here, وَرُوِيَ أَنَّ اللَّهَ تَعَالَى أَوْحَى إِلَى مُوسَى عَلَيْهِ السَّلَامِ يَا مُوسَى كُلِّ الْعَامِلِينَ الْمُعْجَبِينَ اخْصَرُوا وَكُلِّ الْمُذْنِبِينَ التَّائِبِينَ أَبْشِرُوا. And he says here, it was narrated that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to Moses, to Musa alayhi salam, tell those who are working. Remember, the last chapter was about the importance of getting to work, doing righteous deeds, getting busy. Your time is limited. Tell the workers, people who are like that, but they are deluded regarding themselves. They see themselves as something. Tell them, اخسروا, you're losing. You're at a loss. You're in ruin. You're heading towards destruction. And say now to the sinners who are repenting, glad tidings for you. So look at the discrepancy here. This person is sinning, but they're repenting. They recognize the evil. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, according to this narration, you're better off than the people who are working but think something of themselves. And here it says, it was also narrated from the stories of the righteous that some of them would say, لِأَنْ أَبِيتَ نَائِمًا وَأُصْبِحَ نَادِمًا أَحَبُّ إِلَيَّ مِنْ أَنْ أَبِيتَ قَائِمًا وَأُصْبِحُ مُعْجَبًا. It is more beloved to me to spend the night asleep and wake up in regret. Why is he regretting? Sleep is haram? So why is he regretting sleeping at night? He could be praying tahajjud. He's saying, I'm not praying any extra prayers. It's not haram to sleep at night, but he's saying, I'd rather wake up. For them, it was a point of regret to sleep the whole night, right? To not pray anything in tahajjud. Nowadays, we tap ourselves in the back if we wake up for fajr when the sun is up, right? So it just shows you the discrepancy between people's mindset and their goals. So he's saying, for me to spend the whole night in sleep and wake up in regret that I didn't pray any extra tahajjud is more beloved to me than if I were to spend the whole night standing in prayer and to wake up thinking something of myself. One of the scholars, he narrates a story about himself. He says, there was one night that I spent its entirety in prayer. And When I woke up, I thought something of myself. I was impressed with it. I said, good job, Muhammad, tapped myself on the back. And I said, you're the man. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but you get the idea. And then he says, so I went to the public bath. Back then, they had public baths where people would like take a communal, like it's a communal building, people shower there. And, they didn't have bathrooms installed in their homes. So he goes to a communal bath and he says, I hung up my thiyab on the outside and went in to take a bath. And he says, when I came out, I put on the wrong thawb. It belonged to somebody else. Someone else was in there. They're the same brand, Nike or whatever. So he puts on the wrong thawb and he's heading to leave. He says, as I'm heading to leave, this guy, rushes out and says, Sheikh, that's my thawb, sorry. So he says, my bad. And they just switch thawbs. Problem solved. It's a misunderstanding. But he says, when I went outside, the village kids were there. And of course, any misunderstanding with the village kids or any kids is going to change into a different story. So he says, they accost me, the village kids, and they surround me and they say, Sariqu thiyab al-hammamat. Sariqu thiyab al-hammamat. Here's the thief of the bathrooms. This guy robs the bathrooms, the clothes, right? He's the sneaker stealer. We can relate to that, right? You come out with a fresh pair on Eid, you walk out with some old raggedy pair that belongs to somebody else. So he says that happened to me. And I realized he said, I made the connection in my head. I thought of something of myself. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showed me, you're nothing. Relax. You're the thief of the bathrooms if Allah wills it. If Allah wills it in an instance, you could become the thief of the bathrooms, even if you're not. So he said, I realized that and I relaxed. I calmed down in the way that I think, in the way that I approach worship. You read some of the narrations of the most righteous. Their approaches to worship was, I am doing nothing. Oh Allah, if you forgive me, if you accept from me, that's throwing me a bone more than I deserve. That attitude reads your rank rising with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. While the other attitude reads your rank depleting, falling. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet said that whoever is humble, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raises them. That's the formula. You have to think nothing of yourself. You have to belittle your actions. You cannot be deluded from the reality that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing you the ultimate favor by even allowing you to perform it. The Prophet ﷺ is narrated to have said that of the actions that destroy you, إعجاب المرء بنفسه, for a person to be deluded regarding themselves. And Umar used to say, أخوف ما أخاف عليكم أن تهلكوا فيه ثلاث. شح مطاع وهوى متبع وإعجاب المرء بنفسه. Three things that I'm of the most afraid for you guys, Umar is saying to the community, to the Muslims in general, that will cause your destruction are for you to follow your miserliness, to be so cheap and just to follow that as a way of life. Number two is to follow your desires. And number three is to be deluded regarding yourselves, to think something of yourself. And it was narrated about Ali radiallahu anhu that he would say, Al-i'jabu diddu as-sawab wa afatul albab. That to be deluded regarding yourself, this is the opposite of what's right. So if you ever find yourself thinking something of yourself, tapping yourself on the shoulder, saying to yourself, good job, that's a good sign that what you're doing is wrong, he's saying. And at the same time, he said, this is the pitfall of the people of understanding. People who are pious, because they're pious, right? They do actions. They don't fall into the previous categories that Ibn Qudamah was talking about that we went over last week. So they're not overindulging in the dunya. They're not forgetting their duty towards the king, right? Towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as the metaphor goes. But this is their pitfall, he's saying. They avoided all of that. They were focused, they were awake, but they end up falling in this. So be careful. It is something that the righteous, the shaitan gets them this way. Remember, if shaitan can't push you past the mark, he'll pull you past it. He's okay, as long as you're not hitting it. So pushing you past the mark could be sinning, not caring, not praying, not following up with any of your duties towards Allah. But if he can't and he sees that you care, then he'll pull you past it, which is extremism, not following the sunnah, being deluded, being insincere, because that way you miss the mark as well, and then the ruin touches you either way. The second category, remember we said this is the first category of self-delusion. The second category is regarding the dunya. Right? So everyone looks in the mirror and says, okay, do I look nice before you head out? That's the normal. But some people spend a lot of time there. Right? I look really good. And you tell me how you do. No, I look really good. Anyone knows these people? They're not okay with one, you look good. It must be, and like I didn't wear this outfit enough, right? I have to go out again today. I have to go to buy milk with it. Some people are really deluded with how good they look. And it becomes a point of purpose where many people have to take a snap, not that one, my angle's a little weird, and it twirl the exact degrees. Redo. 45 minutes later, now we're ready to go out. That's a dangerous level of being impressed with yourself, right? That's something that we want to avoid. It was narrated here that Aisha radiallahu anha, she says about herself, لبست مرة درعا جديدا فجعلت أنظر إليه وأعجب به. One time I got a new cloak and I was looking at it nonstop and I was very, very impressed with it. I really, really liked it. So Abu Bakr, her father, saw her and he said, أما علمت أن العبد إذا دخله العجب بزينة الدنيا مقته ربه حتى يفارق تلك الزينة. So her father Abu Bakr is telling her, don't you know that when a servant gets deluded regarding any of the enjoyments of this world, gets so impressed with it, so attached to it, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hates that, or hates him for doing that, until he abandons that enjoyment. So she says, when he said that, I took it off immediately and I gave it in sadaqah, and he told me, Asa dhalika an yukaffir anki, perhaps this will expiate the sins that you gained. So they had a much higher standard, by the way. Their standard was very, very high, and what they considered as inappropriate sometimes could be permissible, like wearing a nice shirt and having it on is not haram, but they had such a high standard, and he noticed from her, she's overly connected to this piece of cloth. It's entering your heart. That's dangerous. They were so vigilant about these things and hyper aware of making sure they had no place in their heart, no place in their deeds. Any questions so far, comments? So the first thing that ruins your actions is riya, showing off. And the second thing is ujb, right? Self-amazement. What's the difference between them? What's the difference between ujb, self-amazement, and showing off? Yes, sir. What's your name? Go ahead, Ziad. There you go, right? Self-amazement, no one could know. You're not telling people, you're not posting your good deeds. It could be just you, but you're just so lost in you. And that's dangerous. Where you think, I'm the man or the woman, right? I really got this going. I'm, so much better than so-and-so. I know I'm the man, goes for both. It doesn't really matter. I have so much going for me. You see someone performing something or they're posting how they're acting on Instagram saying, and I don't do that. I'm so much better. Those are dangerous thoughts. You may not think them so explicitly. They may not come out so clean sentence. It may be in, it may be very subtle. It may be inside of you. You have to be extra vigilant to never allow these thoughts to take hold. The next thing he mentions that ruins your deeds is, yes. Fine. Yeah. Yeah. That's a extra. Inshallah, they will. It will. I'll tell you this. It will work over time, over a long time. Maybe when they'll be adults. No. So that's. But I just want to go back to that first, like because you ended with that. But it will make a difference over time for sure. Inshallah, maybe immediately. But if it doesn't immediately, for sure over time, because the atmosphere is what they remember, not the exact words. They may not remember that Mama always said to read Quran, but they'll remember that Mama always sat to read Quran, and she had us next to her or whatever. But anyway, that's not just for your kids, but any situation where there's a benefit in showing others. But it's a very, very thin line. Am I doing this to show others so they can benefit, or am I doing it for me? That's a very thin line. It's not gonna be like a red light in your head, like, oh, when the red light goes off, I'm in the danger zone, my intention is not going right, and otherwise I'm fine. You always have to be constantly focusing on it, which is the next chapter, which we'll get to next week, which is the muraqabah wal khashya, taking care of, watching yourself, constantly putting yourself to self-account. But for now, so definitely with your kids, it's a lot easier, right? You won't feel like you want your kids to say, mashallah, look at mama or baba, right? In fact, like, it's it's not something that occurs on our mind too often. And very often the kids are impressed with you for a certain age and they hate you for a certain age. It's like, inevitable. So it's a whole different mess. But with that being said, you're a lot more safer from feeling like you're showing off, I think, there in front of family members in general. When it comes to in public, you could perform good deeds publicly as well to encourage others. You just have to be very, very careful about your intention. Scholar said here's some, things to check off that will help you stay sincere. Number one, make sure what you do in private is better than in public. If you always pray your sunnahs in the masjid but never pray them at home, that's a red flag. Number one, because the sunnah is to pray them at home aslan, right? The Prophet would mostly pray them at home almost entirely, except for very few exceptions. Number two is that you're just praying more in public than you are in private. It's not a good sign. It's a sign that the people are too important of a factor. Number two is, in addition to the private you being better than the public too, to have some secret private deeds that no one knows about. It's impossible for me to show off with these because no one knows. When Hassan died, radiallahu anhu, the grandson of the Prophet ﷺ, they said after his funeral, women and children came to us saying, "Where will we be fed now?" And his family said, "What are you talking about?" They said that Hassan used to provide for us. They said, "We never know." And this was decades where he was their sole provider. So they said, we were coming here to find out if his inheritors will continue the sadaqah. They said, we didn't even know about it, right? And there's narrations about that the man would spend all night in prayer and his spouse wouldn't even notice. So these are a bit, extraneous, but at the same time, they just show us the extent that people went to hide certain deeds. And then the third, and should probably be first, the most important, which is connect your heart to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Constantly be reading about his names and attributes, because when you read about his forgiveness, you won't really be enticed or deluded regarding the forgiveness of people. When you read about his greatness or his riches, you won't be enticed by what people have when you know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala better. These are just some quick things. There's obviously, each one of these topics, as you could see, could be a whole lecture in of itself. We could delve into the hadith and the explanations, but that would take a lot of times, and we want to see the advice as Ibn Qudamah gave it with just very little outside material. So I hope that helps, inshallah. So the next thing that he mentioned, and the last two we'll mention quickly now. The first of them is tahqir al-Muslim, belittling your fellow Muslims, to put them down, to think less of them. He says, never belittle another Muslim or to even think that you're better than them, because this is something that will nullify your deeds. It's going to cancel out everything that you're doing, the same theme that he's talking about this whole chapter. And then he says a nice story here. He says it was narrated that in the time of Isa alayhi salam, he was walking with his disciples, right, his companions. And they come to a fortress, and a thief is inside that fortress. He's busy rummaging around, robbing stuff. He looks out the window, and he sees who's outside passing by this fortress. It's Isa alayhi salam and his disciples. So he's thinking to himself, this is a prophet of Allah. He's walking with his close disciples. They're going about in their pious adventures, learning from him, doing good. And here am I, the absolute lowest of the low, right, in the middle of the night, rummaging around, stealing things. So he's realizing, he's having an epiphany, right? He's realizing that this is a very bad situation to be in. So he says, let me leave what I'm doing, repent right now, and join them. And he makes that decision. He climbs down the fortress, and he starts walking some distance behind them, intending to join them. As he's getting closer, he realizes, you know what? I'm a really, really low person. Like, I don't even deserve to walk next to them because of how low I am. This is a prophet, and then his pious students. Who am I even to be next to them? Let me walk some distance behind them. Right? That makes more sense for my level. I'll walk behind them. I'm not deserving to be next to them. Right? That was his conclusion. So as they're walking, one of Isa alayhi salam's disciples notices there's someone behind them. So he turns around and he sees this man, and he recognizes him. This is that scumbag, the thief, right? That's the exact thought that he says. He says, who is this dog walking behind us? Right? That is what the story says. He says, who is this stray dog? Is he lost? What's he looking for? Our company cannot be soiled by his presence. Right? This is the thought that he has. So he says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals to Isa alayhi salam, tell the thief and your companion to start their deeds all over. You got a new beginning. Newsflash, you have a new page, a new book. For the thief, because you repented, all your sins are gone. Start new, a new page in life. And as for your companion, tell him what he said in that he says, tell the thief, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals, saying, tell the thief to start a new page in life, to begin with his deeds all over again. Why? Because I have forgiven him. غَفَرْتُ لَهُ بِتَوْبَتِهِ وَازْدِرَائِهِ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ. I have forgiven him because of his repentance, one, and two, because of how little he saw himself. He was so ashamed that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgave him. And then tell your companion now that I have to start his deeds all over, because all the good he's done has been zero. So the first guy, the bad is zero. The good guy, his good is zero because of how low he saw the thief. They had the same thought. But with one person, it raised them with Allah because it was about himself. And with the other person, it ruined all their deeds because it was about someone else that you have no right to belittle. And it was narrated here, وَقَالَ بَعْضُ أَنْبِيَاءِ بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلِ لِقَوْمِهِ إِيتُونِي بِخَيْرِكُمْ. is another story that he narrates here, that one of the prophets of Bani Israel tells the people, now he gathers his people that he's leading as a prophet and says, bring me the best of you. Who's the best man here? The most pious. فأتوه برجل فقال له النبي ائتني بشرهم فرجع بنفسه فقال ما وجدت فيهم شرا مني فقال صدقوا أنت خيرهم. That he comes to his people of Bani Israel and he tells them, bring me the best of you. Who's the most pious? So they produce a man. They say, he's the best of us. So the prophet tells him, that man, you choose the worst of them. So he comes back and he says, I didn't find anyone worse than me. This is the worst that I could find. So the prophet tells him, they said the truth. You were the best of them. To have it's all about your mindset. It's a very subtle thing. How do you think of yourself? How do you think of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? That can change everything. The deeds are not the end all be all. They're important. And they're a part of the picture. Also, Allah wouldn't command them. We wouldn't be doing this. But at the same time, don't lose sight about the bigger picture. How you view yourself, how you view Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could change everything. The lengthy hadith that the Prophet ﷺ says that the servant, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, bring him close on the day of judgment and remind him of some of his sins and the things that he did evil, and will tell him, and the person will see no good deeds in their register. Just evil upon evil that Allah is reminding of them of, that you did this on that day and this on this day. And then they will say, they will look around for some kind of help. They'll look to their right, they'll see nothing but the evil they did. The left, same thing. The fire is in front of them, the account in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive them. And they'll say, how did I get this? What did I do to get this? I don't see any good that I've done. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells them, كُنْتَ لَا تَرْجُوا الْعَفْوَ مِنْ أَحَدٍ غَيْرِ. You didn't expect or hope for pardon from anyone else. So it won't be denied from you today. So your approach and your outlook of who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is and who you are could change everything, even if you don't have a good deed to your name. The Prophet ﷺ said, بِحَسْبِ امْرِئٍ مِّنَ الشَّرِّ أَنْ يَحْقِرَ أَخَاهُ الْمُسْلِمِ. It is enough of an evil for a Muslim to belittle their fellow Muslim. What does it mean enough? Enough to destroy you. Enough to ruin your deeds. It's bad enough to earn you destruction. Right? This is the implied meaning. He also said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, another hadith, that two men from the previous nations, one of them was righteous and one of them was a sinner. And the righteous would always advise the sinner, until one day he got sick of him and said, Wallahi, Allah will not forgive you. I swear you'll never be forgiven. How many times do I tell you the same thing and you just insist? You're done. What hope do you have? So he said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then revealed, مَنْ ذَا الَّذِي يَتَأَلَّى عَلَيَّ أَنْ لَا أَغْفِرَ لِفُلَانٍ. Who is the one who has the audacity to speak on my behalf that I won't forgive or will forgive? Who is that? Who has that audacity? Who has that knowledge? Who has that insight besides Allah? No one. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the angels, you are my witnesses that I have forgiven for this one and cancelled all the deeds of this one. This guy's done. Just that thought, that feeling, he's done. And just because of him having the audacity and this person having hope, Allah knows. Or he's a sinner. He's not. We're all sinners, right? That doesn't not apply to any of us. He doesn't have no hope. Who has the ability to decide that? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then chose to forgive him. So it shows us the extent, how heavy this thought process is and how significant it is on your standing with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The last thing that he mentions in this chapter of the things that nullify your deeds is mukhalafatu sunnah, going against the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And he says this is something that whether in action or in beliefs is going to nullify your deeds, because the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is the guide who was sent to show us the path. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِنَّكَ لَتَهْدِي إِلَى صِرَاطٍ مُسْتَقِيمٍ. And indeed you, O Muhammad ﷺ, are surely a guide to the straight path. And whoever goes against these evidences of what to do and what the Prophet ﷺ did, then this is for sure a path of misguidance. Right? These are the words of Ibn Qudamah. So he says, don't go past what the Prophet ﷺ taught, because this will be extremism. This will lead you to extremes in the deen, whether it's too extreme or too liberal, too conservative, too liberal. And some examples of that he mentions are like people who are overly entertaining to their second thoughts and guesses in wudu. Did I wash this? Did I wash this? Right? Did I wash this again? Then they end up making wudu in 45 minutes. Right? There's something that can go from a mild inconvenience that a person makes wudu extra time to something that is now super tedious, and it's something that is all over, where someone ends up feeling that they need to wash more. So the whole point of the wudu, which is getting ready for salah, goes down the drain. Right? This is something that happens all the time. And increasing, the same thing, and being wasteful using the water. These are basic things that the Prophet ﷺ advised us not to do and do. So it starts from here, the most basic things, sticking to the sunnah in them, and then moving on to the more greater things in deen. So he said, stick to what he commanded, stick to what he prohibited. That is your rubric for what you should or shouldn't do. He keeps it very brief. And then he mentions here that is narrated from Sulaiman ad-Darani that he said, just reading who he is here in the foot. No, he's just one of the righteous scholars from the first generation. He died 205 Hijri, which is the second generation of Sahaba. So he says that if you ever want to do an action of obedience, look for it in the sunnah. If you find it, go for it. And if not, then stop, even if you think it's a good action, because it is not. Well, it's very simple rubric, very, very straightforward. There's many hadith about following the sunnah. Of the most basic of them, the Prophet ﷺ said, وَقَدْ تَرَكْتُ فِيكُمْ مَا إِنْ اعْتَصَمْتُمْ بِهِ لَن تَضِلُّوا بَعْدِ أَبَدًا. In the final, one of the final addresses that he had to the Muslim Ummah, the farewell sermon, a couple of weeks or months before he died, ﷺ, about a month and a half, he spoke at Hajj to the greatest gathering that he never saw a gathering of that size before, nor would he see one after. So he chose to emphasize the summary of Islam, the most basic concepts. If you look at Khutbatul Wada', that's what you'll find. And one of the things that he said is, I have left you with that, which if you hold on to, you'll never be misguided after me. That is the book of Allah and the teachings of His Messenger. In another hadith, he said, من أطاعني فقد أطاع الله ومن عصاني فقد عصى الله. Whoever obeys me obeys Allah, and whoever disobeys me is actually disobeying Allah. And then another hadith, he says, everybody will enter Jannah except those who refuse. They said, who will refuse, O Messenger of Allah? He says, those who follow my example enter Jannah. Those who refuse to follow my example refuse to enter Jannah. Showing us the reality of following his example. And of the greatest hadith is the one of the three men who came to his house. So they came to his house to ask him some questions. He was not there, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So they asked his family, what is Rasulullah like at home? So they said he prays and he sleeps, meaning at night. He eats and he fasts. So some days he's fasting, some days he's not. And, he lives in the service of his family. That's how he spends his day. He's always serving them. So they said, so the hadith says it was as if they belittled that. They said, that's not really, they said, that's Rasulullah. He doesn't need to do much because he's Rasulullah. So this was their approach. It was an arrogant approach, right? Not just following the sunnah, but now we're also going into al-ujb. So they're mixing more than one downfall. So they belittled that and they said, he's the prophet. We're nowhere near him. So, and he's been forgiven for all of his sins. So we'll do more. They considered what they're doing better or more. Not because they were belittling him as a person, but they said he doesn't need to do more. He's already ahead of the game. So they said, one of them said, Usalli layl abada. Pray all night long. Never going to sleep. I'll get cat naps somewhere else. I'll figure it out. But as for night, sleep all night. The other one said, Asumu dahr wala uftir. Going to fast all the time. Never stop fasting. And the last one said, A'tazilu nisa. I'll never get married. I'm going to live a life of celibacy, like the monks and priests of old, and just live in devotion to Allah. So he said, the Prophet ﷺ, the hadith continues now, the Prophet ﷺ comes back and he hears about them and he says, he gathers the people in the masjid and asks them, did you guys say so and so? And they say yes. So he says, he told them, ﷺ, I am the most fearing of Allah. I am the closest to him, the most obedient. This is by nature of him being Rasulullah. He's here to show us how it's done perfectly. This is the peak of human perfection. If he wasn't, then what's the purpose of sending him as the example, right? So he's not showing off. He's just stating the reality. So I fast and I break my fast. I pray and I go to sleep, and I have my family. I get married and I have my wives and I take care of them. فَمَنْ رَغِبَ عَنْ سُنَّتِي فَلَيْسَ مِنِّي. Whoever abandons my sunnah or turns away from it is not of me. You are not following pious example if you think this is too little or not good enough. So you're given enough options within the sunnah that you don't need to come up with a new way of life. So why would you ever need to look elsewhere? When the sunnah itself is not rigid, has plenty of options, even regarding these very same things, marriage, fasting, and prayer. But he gave them a very harsh warning, which is, you want to do better, you want to find the answer elsewhere, go for it. But that has nothing to do with me, right? And that comes with it the reward, the eligibility for Jannah, and so on and so forth. And then finally, to a hadith, he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, ألا إني أوتيت الكتاب ومثله معه ألا يوشك رجل شبعان على أريكته يقول عليكم بهذا القرآن فما وجدتم فيه من حلال فأحلوه ما وجدتم فيه من حرام فحرموه. And another hadith similar in wording, he said, لا ألفين أحدكم متكئا على أريكته يأتيه الأمر من أمري مما أمرت به أو نهيت عنه فيقول لا ندري ما وجدنا في كتاب الله اتبعناه. He said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I have been given the book and something similar with it. The book is the Quran. What's similar? The Sunnah, right? Explaining how it's done, the Quran in action. So he said these two are revelation. They're from Allah. And soon a man will come, and this is how the Prophet described him. He said he has a full stomach, Shaban. He's reclining on a couch. So the image is like some guy sitting like this, right? He didn't say this, but you could just imagine, right? If he's full stomach on a couch, where's his hand going to be? It's going to be on the pillow. But that's the image that's drawn. Someone who's full, kicking back on a couch, saying, this is the book of Allah. Whatever we find in it as halal, we will make it halal. Or you guys make it halal, he's commanding others. And whatever you find in it as haram, then make it haram. The other hadith that's similar, he says, I hope not, he's like, I hope not to see any of you. I hope this doesn't apply to any of you, that this will come later. That you'll be kicking back on a couch, and that one of you would be kicking back on a couch, and one of the commands that I was given, meaning it's not just my idea, I don't think it's great, you should do this, it's something I was given, meaning it's revelation. So a command reaches him, one of my commands that I was given. He's showing us the sunnahs from Allah as well, right? That's the meaning here. So a command of the ones that I was given reaches him, or a prohibition that I was prohibited from, something that I was told is haram, I'm sharing that is being shared with him. This is Rasulullah said this. So he says, I don't know. If we find it in the book of Allah, we'll follow it. So the Prophet is saying this is a horrible person, right? This is someone, the imagery is quite negative. It is someone who is in a danger zone. What's going to happen? The very least is that the deeds will be nullified. Right? The famous hadith, من أحدث في أمرنا هذا ما ليس منه فهو رد. He said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whoever introduces a new matter into this concept of ours, this deen, which is not originally from it, then it will be rejected. Allah will not accept it. So very quickly, chapter of the things that the concepts that nullify your deeds and make them worthless. Number 1, showing off, riyat. Number 2, al-ujb, being deluded or amazed by yourself. And then tahqir al-Muslim, belittling your fellow Muslims, looking down on them, being arrogant. And lastly, not following the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, doing actions that are outside of it or in contraindication to it. So these are the 4 that he gathered. There's a lot more. There's a lot more details. A lot of the hadith I added were supplementary, like I said, just so we could look at the wording of our messenger. But the chapter in the book is just 2-3 pages. So he meant it as a brief reminder, which is what we're going through, and we'll continue to bring this every single time so that you could know that you will not fully benefit from these topics until you explore them on your own. Go pick up Riyadh al-Salihin, the chapter on showing off or sincerity, chapter on sincerity. Go look up the chapter of, this will all come under sincerity, which is ujb, riyat, tahqir al-Muslim. That will come under Riyadh al-Salihin, but you'll find 20-30 hadith where he gathered about it and other stories. That now you have a wealth of information. When you feel yourself showing off, when you feel yourself getting deluded by how you look or what you're doing or others are doing that you're not doing, then you have this wealth, this whole bag of a hadith that you can dive into, get one that applies to you, and get your act together. As opposed to having just this half a page that I went over here, it's a limited pool of knowledge. So when you need it, that's all you have. But if you've read pages and pages about showing off and the importance of sincere intention, whether the hadith or otherwise, now you have a wealth of information that, again, you can dive into when you need. That applies to everything that we're doing here, the stories of the dunya. So that last chapter, Ibn Qudamah does a couple of pages of what he thinks he wants to include in this mini treatise that he's sending to his friend as an advice. There's so much more. You owe it to yourself. You'll be better in tune. All this will have a better effect on you if you have that wealth of information to dive into. Next chapter is al-muraqaba wal-khashya, humility, humble submissiveness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and muraqaba is self-account, being accountable with yourself. So that's the next chapter that he's going to focus on. It's a little bit longer than the other ones, so we'll probably do it in 2 or 3 weeks because it's much longer than any of the previous chapters. In fact, it's the last chapter. It's a 3-chapter book. So the first chapter is the dunya and its reality. The second chapter is things that ruin your deeds. And the last chapter is being accountable to yourself and humbly submissive to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we'll probably take 2 or 3 weeks on that last chapter and call it a course, inshallah. I have copies for everyone that I don't have right now. I'll bring them next week of the English version of it that Yusuf took early. But inshallah, we'll have one for everyone next week. But please, we'll say that again next week, but make sure that if you're going to take it, you're going to read it. It's not going to decorate your shelf. Any questions, comments, feedback? Jazakumullah khairan, guys, for your attentiveness. It was a pleasure seeing you as always. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to instill these concepts in our hearts and to guide us to performing in a manner that is pleasing to Him. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك وصلى الله وبارك على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.